very quiet. Don't want to disturb the worms here, but come with me. And I want you to take a look here. See underneath here. The worms are hard at work. And what you can see in my hand here is beautiful, delicious, and nutritious worm castings. And so today I'm going to share with you whether or not you need to use worm castings when starting seeds. So the question that I posed there is, do you need to use worm castings for starting seeds? And it might come as a shock to you, but the answer is no. And so I'm going to explain why that might be the case. But first, I want to provide a little bit of background context on what my journey has been with worm castings, and then a little experiment that I've been running over the course of the last 5 weeks to then answer that question of whether or not you need to be utilizing worm castings for starting seeds. And so for myself, the journey really began back in 2016, and I was living in Australia at that time where they don't have a composting system. So I started researching ways that I could compost my kitchen scraps at home, and what I quickly found was that worm farming is one of the best ways of going about it. And I thought, that sounds a little bit funky, a little bit out there. I am all in here for it. And so I got set up with a worm farm and started to go down the rabbit hole of kind of learning all the ins and outs of how to be utilizing these seemingly incredible worm castings that come from them. And I came across this YouTube video by Albo Pepper where he shows just how big of an impact worm castings can have on a plant's development. And so I got even more fascinated by this. And so as soon as I moved back to BC, one of the very first things that I did was get my worm farm set up and running. And with worm castings starting to come out, I started to add these into my own little experiments, share those on my Instagram account, and got people starting to reach out to me asking, how do I get my hands on some of those? And that was one of the really key moments in ultimately developing what is now Mind and Soil. And so leading into this season, about 5 weeks ago, I started a set of seeds in our worm casting seedling mix, as well as another set of seeds in just a sterile store-bought mix with none of the microbes, bacteria, enzymes that would be coming from the worm castings. And so what I want to do next is take you over to my seed starting station where we can take a quick look at them before bringing them into the garage to make a couple of observations. So let's go through these plants here, and I want to make 3 big observations. The first one here is germination. And one thing that we can see and that we've heard from so many of our customers is that they have really, really good germination when utilizing worm castings. And the reason why is because worm castings are 100% organic matter, which means that they retain a lot of moisture. And because of that, it creates that ideal environment for seeds to be germinating in. Remember, it needs to be moist and warm for them to germinate and begin to grow. Now, the second big observation, and this is a really important one, is that the plants that have worm castings, they just look so lush and green and full of life. So when we look at this tomato baby here, those leaves could not be any more vibrant and green. And the reason behind that is because rather than it being in a sterile environment, it is absolutely covered and surrounded with nutrients, with microbes, with enzymes, with bacteria. Everything that it needs to essentially be developing its immunity system as a teeny tiny early plant baby here to get nice and strong before we transplant it to the big wild world of the garden. And the folks at West Coast Seeds, they saw the exact same thing when they did a trial comparing a sterile mix to our worm casting seedling mix that is much more alive and full of life in there for our plant babies. And the third and final key observation is that some of these plants are just growing larger as a result of those worm castings. So when we look at this cucumber baby, it is well ahead here, and the leaves are significantly larger than those that did not receive worm castings. And once again, this is something that we've seen throughout our community with, say, Ashley, who's been doing side-by-side comparisons with some tomatoes and with some peppers. And what we see once again is that the worm castings are really helping for the plant simply to grow nice and big and strong. So given the germination, how lush the plants are looking, how big they've grown, Why did at the beginning I said that you don't necessarily need to use worm castings for starting your seeds? Well, the reason behind that is because what's of absolute highest importance to me is not whether or not you're using worm castings, but rather that as many individuals are getting into gardening as possible to experience the mental health benefits of it, whether it is with worm castings or without worm castings, which is why I love to do so many of these videos for free so that anybody can be utilizing it. So for those of you that I have not met before, I'm Jordan from Mind and Soil, where we're looking to introduce 1 million individuals to mindful gardening. So if you're looking for more peacefulness, more restoration, more calmness in your life, then I really encourage you to subscribe to our channel here, because we put out new videos just like this every single week to be taking the guesswork out of gardening and to be helping you tap into the mental health benefits of gardening. And so, do you need worm castings in order to experience those mental health benefits? Absolutely not. I didn't use them in my first couple of seasons gardening, but I fell in love with gardening. And as we can see, those plants, they're still growing and they're doing all right. And so it would be an absolute tragedy to me if somebody came across our channel and ultimately did not get into gardening because they didn't have access to worm castings. If you don't have access to worm castings, you can still grow amazing, beautiful plant babies. But if you do have access to worm castings and you want to have that more growth and the more lush plants, then the question becomes, how much do you utilize in your plants? And so if you have access to your own supply or your own worm farm, I encourage you to mix about 10% to 33% into your seedling mix, into your potting mix for starting your seeds and growing your little plant babies. Now, if you don't have access to a worm farm or worm castings, or even just the time to be harvesting them, sifting them, and then getting all the ratios right, the inputs, mixing it all up, then you can just head over to our website and purchase our pre-mixed worm casting seedling mix, which is what I've utilized to start all of these seeds in. And the link to that is down in the description below here. But folks, that's everything that I wanted to cover off on today. Whether you're using worm castings or not, I want to be growing with you this coming season. If you have any questions, I would absolutely love to hear them down in the comments below here. And if you're curious to see what my method is and what materials I utilize for starting plant babies like this in a step-by-step video, then simply click on this tile right here, and that will take you over to our step-by-step seed starting video guide. But folks, that's everything for today. Really hope that this has been useful. I can't wait to catch you on the next video, and go get those hands dirty.